Good evening, everyone. My name is Tom Cardwell, Dr. Tom Cardwell. I'm a clinical psychologist living and working in Lincoln, Nebraska in the United States. I was invited by Katerina Tchaikovska to speak to you as part of her project on the territorial defense of Ukraine. I'm very happy to be involved. Recently, I've done some seminars for America House on topics such as managing fear and psychological first aid. And I'm very happy to be with you tonight. I wish I could be there in person, but I can't. So I'm recording my presentation, and I hope it's helpful to you. I also hope that at a future point, we might gather to just talk about things that are of interest to you that we might not have covered in my presentation, or if you want more information about it. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and load my presentation, share my screen with you. As I mentioned, my name is Tom Cardwell, and I live in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm married and have 3 children, a boy and 2 girls, and 7 grandchildren. 3 girls and 4 boys, and the youngest is 9 and the oldest is 23. Really enjoy spending time with them. I went back to work after retiring as a community college administrator. I was dean of students, and after being retired for 3.5 years, doing a lot of bike riding and different things, I decided to go back to work part-time. So now I'm employed again, and I'm working with people, helping them get healthy. My area of interest actually is health psychology. So I'm helping people to lose weight, to manage their time better, to deal with substance abuse issues, and manage pain, all those kinds of things in hospitals, which has been a lot of fun for me. I also have worked extensively with the Red Cross, and part of the reason I think I was invited is because I've worked with services to the armed forces. And in that capacity, I've done workshops for families that are where they have a service member deploying, or when they have somebody returning from deployment. And because both leaving and reintegration into a family can be challenging sometimes. And the Red Cross has some excellent materials that I've used, and I've actually adapted a little bit for this presentation. So we'll go ahead and get started. So when we typically think about being exposed to traumatic events during war, we think about the effects on soldiers naturally, because they're in the front line fighting. For example, being fired upon, being a prisoner of war, sustaining an injury, witnessing serious death or injury of comrades when you're fighting. However, we don't want to forget that civilians too experience the effects of war, including having their lives threatened, being bombed, being shot at, being physically assaulted or raped, being confined to one's home, being displaced, sometimes out of the city or even country, trying sometimes unsuccessfully to protect children, which is extremely stressful naturally for the person remaining home, as well as worrying about the person that's off fighting on behalf of your family and country. So there are short and long-term effects of war on civilians and combatants. War is catastrophic to the health and well-being of nations naturally. So it would be best if it was avoided. Conflict causes more death and disability than any major disease. So even though we haven't had a world war recently, we've had a lot of significant conflicts since World War II. Korea and Vietnam and Cambodia and the Middle East, there's many significant conflicts that are unfortunate. We have learned some things from those. So naturally, it's true that mental health is affected by being in combat. Many people recover, but a substantial minority have lasting, even lifelong effects. They kind of discovered that in World War I, that they talked about something called shell shock that soldiers experienced. that's when they began paying attention to the effects of war on people. It's also become increasingly clear that the mental health of civilians is affected by war naturally, because they're subject often to the same kinds of things that soldiers are and have even less ability to defend themselves. Everyone, including children, the elderly and disabled, are vulnerable during war. The seriousness of mental illness seems to be related to the amount of trauma suffered and the lack of physical and emotional support. So that's one thing we've learned, that, you know, if you're disabled or elderly or a child, you tend to be affected more just because of your status, and then the amount of trauma affects people. So if it's not that large of trauma, people have an easier time overcoming it. But if you suffered to intense or repeated traumas, they cause significant harm to people psychologically. They found that the experience of people in situ, which means on site, versus being relocated to a refugee center, is different. They found that people displaced to refugee camps often have worse experiences than those that do not leave home. It's hard to imagine, because at home, from what I've read in Ukraine, it's pretty horrific. Like, people don't know from minute to minute if they're going to be bombed, if they're going to have electricity, if they're going to have access to water, other utilities, or medical care. It's not good at all, and I very much appreciate that. But it's also true that many times refugee camps aren't very good places for people to be, and particularly women have been abused sexually and otherwise in these environments, and so they're not very satisfactory. In one case, they did a survey of Bosnians encamped in Croatia, and the refugees there, after the conflict had ended, experienced on average 6 more traumatic events. And 1/3 of this group had depression, and 1/4 had PTSD. As I said earlier, being physically disabled was strongly associated with increased depression and PTSD. So if you're wounded in war, that's likely to affect you pretty severely and over a long period of time. So what are some of the effects of ongoing war on civilians? They found that many comment they live in a constant state of fear. You can't get away from it ever, really, because you just don't know when a drone or a bomb or somebody, an enemy combatant is going to attack. The uncertainty itself is quite unbearable at times, because mothers don't know if they can keep their children safe. They don't know if they'll be alive, 24 hours from there. It's really not good. Many have also experienced or witnessed death and dismemberment. People can't sleep or eat. They're edgy and worry about whether or not they'll live tomorrow. Many worry about their children and other family and their safety and future development, particularly if you can't reach people. You don't know if they're okay, if they're alive. It's very stressful. Some engage in risky behavior, such as drinking, to soothe themselves. To talk about self-soothing or self-medicating is something that people do in the moment, often with alcohol, sometimes with other drugs, just to get rid of the pain for a little while. This dread and fear and anger can be debilitating to people. It also has an effect on communities. There's a correlation between the degree of trauma and the number of mental health problems people experience. There's a high correlation between mothers and children's distress in a war situation. In other words, it's been known for a long time that when the mothers are strongly affected, they transmit their distress to their children because of the strong emotional bond between mothers and children. Maternal depression in prenatal and postnatal periods predicts poor growth in infants. So even if you don't realize how strongly you're experiencing these effects of war, your body internalizes it, and it can infect it can affect infants prenatally. It's been known for years that gender-based violence is common in war environments, and that is traumatic for people years following the end of conflict. It's a way of dehumanizing the enemy and also a method of genocide. And war often causes long-term physical and psychological harm to children and adults. And adolescents seem to be very vulnerable. Something about their age that causes them to absorb things. They're aware of what's going on, but they don't have the ability of adults to manage the stress as well. Trauma can lead to eventually to widespread poverty, malnutrition, disability, and social and economic decline for people. But it doesn't have to happen that way. Those are things, that's what the enemy hopes for. But things can be better. Over time, people have learned there are things that populations can do to kind of help survive conflict. And one is to be forward thinking, that I will build back stronger and better. I will work with others to rebuild my community. And some people are pretty resilient in the face of even severe trauma. And, you know, I think a little more burden falls on them to help those that are struggling more to, like, you know, to survive and thrive. Studies consistently show that both physical and psychological support are important and valuable to people. For expectant mothers, social support and traditional birth attendants can play a major role in promoting maternal well-being in war-affected areas. So having that care in the moment when most needed is really important. In one study, they found that allowing people to search for loved ones online, if there's a way to do that, or use cell phones to contact people to read about what's going on can be helpful. For one, it gives people something to do, but also in some cases helps them connect with a loved one or plan what they're going to do after the conflict ends. So what can we do now to help each other? Supporting each other is important. Being a good neighbor, for example, small kindnesses are welcome. Bringing people tea or coffee and a pastry, fresh flowers is always appreciated, but particularly in these times when people are struggling and don't have very much going for them. Asking people if they need anything, like a warm blanket or a little food, or you know, if they would like you to check on their children or something like that. Trying to be as calm as you can and smile and be a soothing presence is really important. I realize you may not feel calm inside, but if you can kind of fake it a little bit, particularly around children, that's very helpful because people feed off your emotional state. And if you're seeming to manage things reasonably well, that helps others calm down a little bit and helps them manage. So another thing that can be done to help is help getting people in touch with their families if possible, providing things, simple things like a blanket and pillow, a coat and scarf, some nutrition, those kinds of things in the moment. Even, you know, it's a gesture of goodwill, and it just lets others know that, you know, you care about them. Thinking about rebuilding better homes, gardens, patios, imagining what your home will be like when you have an opportunity to rebuild, and how I think, you know, that what they found is communities that work together to rebuild, and many have done that successfully, you know, have less trauma because it gives them something constructive to do, and they're not just consumed by all the bad things that have happened to them. There's a few things that we've learned about working with children. One is to give them small, manageable bits of information. You don't have to not tell them the truth, but you can tell them in a way that's suitable for a young child. Too much media just scares them. So I wouldn't have them watching very much TV at all. If you have them watch anything, it might be a soothing movie, animated movie about something, happy or pleasant. Try to be calm and composed and not let your worries affect them. Because again, they will feed off your state of mind. If children ask questions, be honest, but give short answers suitable to their age. It's okay to say you don't know when you don't. In fact, it's better. Don't try to pretend that you know something you really don't know or can't know. Like when the conflict will end. Try to provide a normal routine each day for children is really important. Washing their faces, providing clean clothes if possible, having time set aside to study, time to draw pictures, time to read, perhaps to practice musical instruments, to interact with other children, playing some games, having some supervised activities is really valuable to children. They really need that structure, and you can provide that, and it's good for you too because it gives you something to do with your time that's beneficial to the children. Playing outside if the weather permits is good. I realize now it's winter and cold and you may not have heat, so forgive me if that's not suitable now, but if you have heat and the sun's out and there isn't conflict, allowing the children to get outside and play a game or something is nice. Teaching kindness and compassion. And it's not to say you can't be angry at Russia and the Russians invading you, of course you would be, but in general that people are kind and compassionate. Most people are and want peace and want a better world. I think it helps children imagine what life can be like after the disaster or war. Adolescents are, it's a difficult time for them. They may be afraid, but also afraid to express it. A few will, but many won't. They also need support, though, and comfort, even though they're harder to console. They may want to isolate. Bringing them together to talk among themselves can be good. Having some activities for them to do to take their mind off things going on outside is nice. Maybe some activities where they can talk about future plans, like if they had planned to go to a university someday and pursue some career, they could explore some of those universities and campuses and look at the entrance criteria and some of the classes that they'll need to take and see, if it's a good fit for them or what they have to do to prepare themselves to go on. They can research their plans and reports on careers and even report back to people, helping young people to be future oriented and think about, what their family composition might be like in the future, like if they, are hoping to marry and have children, where they might live, those kinds of things can be helpful and take their mind off what's going on. For men and women, there are some differences that are worth noting. Men tend to show more irritability, anger, and rage. They're generally more aggressive. Not always, but generally. It can be adapted in war, actually, but not around the family. So keep that in mind, that a man who is very gentle at home and loving and good with kids, those kinds of things, may have to change to survive in war because you're having to kill people, and it's not pleasant at all, but it's necessary for the survival, of innocence, your families, communities, and country. But when people have that dramatic of a change to then set that aside and come home and be calm and compassionate again is not easy at first. So that's part of the reintegration process, helping people realize, the kind of emotions and thinking they want to use around families and children is different than what you would use in wartime. And one is good in one scenario, but the other is good in another. But You just have to understand the differences. Women can also be angry, but are more likely to internalize it. They're more likely to feel anxious and depressed. Sometimes they're more likely to feel guilt and shame. This is not to say that men and women um, might exhibit different tendencies. Like some men are just kind of calm and compassionate, and that's just the way they are. They're not going to change. Some women are very outspoken about their emotions, and they can be vocally angry. So you can't, you know, say all men are the same or all women are the same, but these are tendencies. What we do know is war is hard on relationships. Some research shows that soldiers with PTSD, that's post-traumatic stress syndrome, divorce at 3 times the normal rate. So it's a difficult thing being in war and then coming home and stopping fighting. Here's a few things that we've learned about soldiers and partners. When one member of a family goes off to fight, it affects everyone, of course. The soldier is fighting to save his or her family, community, and country. It's, of course, very scary being away from loved ones, but it does help having comrades going through the same thing. So the soldiers, comrades, the people in their squad or platoon or company that are together fighting, come to value each other like family, actually, and it helps them get through it. The fear there is managed because it has to be. Good leadership in the field and a sense of purpose helps people cope with severe stress, such as being in conflict. Sometimes horrific atrocities occur which scar people. You can imagine being next to somebody and that person is killed. There often people come home from war and they never are able to talk about it. Just things that shouldn't happen to anybody happen in war. But some of these things happen to civilians as well. It's just not good. And someday, hopefully, we'll stop having wars. But right now, we know that it's a hard thing for people. Being able to talk about it with a friend or priest or counselor can be helpful. It does depend on the person and the circumstances. Sometimes people just kind of bury their feelings and emotions, or they're repressed by necessity to get through the day or week or month. But eventually people need to talk and grieve and hopefully heal. The thought of getting home to loved ones can keep people going. It often keeps people alive through difficult times. In the meantime, as I said earlier, the comrades, the people they fight with, are like their family for them, and they watch out for each other. What about the people left behind at home to run the family? They assume more responsibility for family functioning. They may often be in danger themselves and have children they're also responsible for. They worry about loved ones away fighting. In fact, some of the soldiers die defending their country. And so you can worry and then find out that your loved one, the father or mother of your children, has passed away. The people at home assume responsibility for everything, really: sheltering, protecting, feeding children, planning a normal routine, as well as hiding their own fear in order to be brave for their children. Consoling children and other family members and strangers often becomes necessary, because if things are going a little bit okay for you, then somebody else is perhaps not doing very well, and you're called upon often to help those people. And you're glad to do it too, because you're a community and you want to help each other. So you don't get much downtime when you're home. There's always something worrying you. If you're able to get a few hours of sleep, you're probably lucky to get that much. It's just so difficult managing the uncertainty of what's going on, not knowing if you're going to be safe from hour to hour or day to day. So what seems to help is One, thinking about what other people are facing and respecting their roles and difficulties, even though they are different from your own. And that could be husbands and wives thinking about each other's respective roles and others in your community. Avoiding triggers as much as possible. And so that could be not watching very much media, so you're not spending all your time thinking about just bad things happening, and protecting your children from that. Those sights and sounds that remind one of war. If you shut those out a little bit, then you can maybe get a little sleep. Try to create as much community as possible. Invite people who are afraid and isolating into your group. Don't leave them in the corner. Go get them and ask them to join you. Sometimes they may resist, and they may need to be left alone at that point. But ask them again the following day or a few hours later, and hopefully eventually they'll accept and join you. And because there's safety in numbers, or at least comfort in numbers. Try to comfort them with kindness and small, generous acts. Try to bring them some joy, whether it's offering a piece of candy or a flower, or maybe somebody who plays an instrument, playing some music and singing, reading a story out loud to children, or just reading to yourself for self-satisfaction. Learn what people are good at or trained in. Take advantage of their expertise. You may have nurses and doctors among you, or medics, or people that are good at repairing plumbing, carpenters. All of these kinds of people can help, people manage the stress of war a little bit better. So it's good to know what kinds of skills people have. Try to provide some relief to those who are clearly suffering, if you can, by doing the little acts of kindness and just sitting with them sometimes, even if you don't say anything. Be aware that some people are more resilient than others, and be glad if that person is you, that you seem to manage stress a little bit better. Some people it's very hard for, and it's not their fault. They're just born that way. Help people remember when they successfully managed adversity in the past is a way to help people develop resiliency. A lot of times people forget that they dealt with some difficult situations in the past and figured it out and did pretty well. And being reminded of that helps them think, well, maybe I can do this too. And try to talk optimistically about the future. We can all, depending on whether we have a devil or angel on our shoulder, I guess, we can be optimistic and think we're going to get through this, and we're going to rebuild, and we're going to build an even stronger community. And this isn't going to happen again. Or we can be pessimistic and think, the worst. Traditions can be very helpful. And one thing I've noted about Ukraine is you have a lot of rich traditions. Your history, music, literature, food, and architecture are all inspirational, in my opinion. Very interesting. The food is very tasty. Love borscht. Strong values about right and wrong seem to be a characteristic of Ukrainians. Resilience in the face of oppression. You are a wonderful addition to the planet and have set an example of courage and strength and resilience. This is my opinion. I wish for you prayers for a quick end to this aggression, reunification of families, and rebuilding better while preserving your amazing culture and artistic heritage. And with that, I will end my presentation. And I'm sorry we don't have time for questions now, but I would be glad to meet with you again if Sabrina would like to arrange such a meeting. You have my email address. I'll move it back up here where you can see it. I'll try to answer any questions I can. Thanks so much for your time, and blessings for all of you.